Well, the Middle East is the most important source of oil and also gas in the world. And why the market is so concerned here is Iran is now threatening passage through an area called the Strait of Hormuz, which is where about 20% of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas need to transit in order to get to markets around the world. We've never actually seen that level of supply disruption ever occur. Many of us might remember when we saw energy prices spike in 2022 in the wake of the Ukraine war. And for those who are old enough, who might remember the big oil price shocks in the Iranian Revolution in the late 70s and into the 80s. What we're talking about here, if Iran actually carry out what they've threatened to do, would be 3 times the size of the shocks we've seen in the past. It could drive petrol at the pump to 50% or even double current prices for a period of time. And so that's got everyone in oil markets on edge here.
And so what are oil prices doing right now as this conflict escalates, and where do you think they could go in the next couple of weeks?
Well, it's important to recognise oil supply hasn't actually been disrupted yet. So as the conflict has escalated in the Middle East, what you're seeing with oil prices is they're rising with something called a risk premium in anticipation of what might happen. And that's why we've seen oil prices rise about almost $20 a barrel from their lows a few months ago. What the concern is if we actually start to see Iranian attacks on oil infrastructure in Gulf states like Iraq, threatening passage to the Strait of Hormuz, which has 20% of the world's oil supply, or even Israeli attacks on Iranian oil, which also travels through the Strait of Hormuz. Any of these things could drive oil prices up much further because the price rises to date are just about the risk of something happening. Something hasn't actually happened yet to disrupt supply.
And does OPEC, which manages oil-producing nations, do they have reserves that could buffer supply shocks and therefore potentially price shocks?
So ordinarily, when you have a big supply disruption, OPEC can come and save the day by increasing its own supply. The problem here is a lot of the OPEC supply also passes through the Strait of Hormuz. So it's actually OPEC's supply capacity which is at risk here. And so there will be no spare capacity anywhere around the world to come and save the day if something happens here. And we have a situation where in the United States, their strategic petroleum reserve, that's their strategic stocks, are near record lows as they've already kind of wound those stocks down after the Ukraine war.
And you've touched on this, Saul, but what would the real world impact be to us here in Australia? Could this push up petrol prices? You've mentioned gas. Could it push up gas prices? And step us through how this actually works when it comes down to how we're affected here in Australia.
Look, it depends how severe the impact is here. But if we end up in the more severe scenario of a major supply shock, we're not just talking about prices at the pump doubling. We're talking about energy costs across the board increasing, and it's going to flow through to the cost of living for everyone, not just in Australia, around the world. And that can actually lead to a global economic recession. And then that also impacts jobs and economic viability from businesses for all Australians at home, but also globally.